Hi, I'm Ozan Redjep, and joining me today is property investor, developer, best-selling author and entrepreneur Mark Homer. Mark, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me on your little video, Ozan.
I know how busy you are, so thanks very much for the time. Most of the people watching this video will almost certainly know who you are, but for anybody who's hearing you speak for the first time, could you tell us a little bit about what you do in property and also a bit about your businesses as well?
Yeah, so I started in property probably about 15 years ago. I started buying stuff overseas, off-plan, loads of things I shouldn't buy. Got into buying little terraced houses, bought several hundred of those for investors, for ourselves, for family. We manage a lot of those. I think we manage 700 tenants here at Progressive now. And sort of moved into buying commercial buildings, largely for conversion to residential. So I've done a series of those projects where we've turned them into apartments or cluster flats. Like to try and keep hold of them, like to manage them from here. And you know, we run a training business, Progressive Property, which trains, we did about 600 training days last year. So we're constantly training property investors in, might be commercial conversion or, you know, buy to let, or maybe HMOs, or, you know, we have some other products as well around personal development. Yeah, written quite a few books, lost count, I don't know, 6 or 7, something like that. Have about 70 staff here in Peterborough. Yeah, that's me.
Busy man. So Mark, I'd like to ask you a little bit about some of the traits that make a good property investor. So I don't know if you've heard this, but I saw this somewhere, when Bill Gates first met Warren Buffett, they each wrote on a piece of paper the sort of the trait they thought was the most important in a successful person, and they both wrote the word focus down. And you struck me as a very focused person, and I suppose what I'm just trying to work out really is it something which comes naturally to you to be focused this way, or have you really had to work at it over the years?
I think it probably came more naturally once I saw the benefit of it. I mean, in the early days of investment, I would be a little bit more scattergun. I'd be trying different things, and not getting really good, not having really deep knowledge on anything. And then over a period of time, I noticed that actually I made a lot more money out of the things that I really focused on, really took the time on, and really got deep knowledge that was better than other people's, knowledge that were better than my competitors in the local area. You know, that really then sort of changed my behaviour, so that I became a lot more focused and
Focused on fewer things?
Yeah, definitely focused on fewer things. You know, if I'm operating an investment system, or you know, we were doing sort of terraces for many years, and small flats, you know, I wouldn't do a load of other stuff, and then I sort of moved on to HMOs afterwards and went into commercial conversion. And yeah, I'd buy any of those now, but you know, I'd only really be operating 1 or 2 models at any one time, and I'd be perfecting them and getting very, very good at those. My brain's quite simple, and it's quite linear, so it likes to go in a straight line. And I you know, when you're sort of a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit all over the place, you tend to I don't know, you don't get the same results, because you can't have the same knowledge in every area. Property is so vast. You know, there's no one, the oldest 70, 75, 80-year-old investors that I know, they've got massive portfolios. None of them have a knowledge of the whole market. It's impossible. There's huge swathes that they will never learn. And that's partly what's so exciting about it. I suppose it's a bit like, I don't know, being a doctor, or you know, maybe being a lawyer.
Yeah.
There's so many areas to learn, so if you specialise, you can get very good, and that's when you really start to be successful and make money.
Yeah, absolutely. Is procrastination something which troubles you? Because I never really hear you talking about this sort of stuff.
Well, I think procrastination probably was an issue for me, because I didn't necessarily know what to invest in. Sometimes when I'm looking at stock market funds, I was having a look just before we came down here. I was having a look at, you know, I've got a gilt fund, and I've got a gold fund, which they're unit trusts, and I sort of bought them towards the end of last year because I was absolutely sure the stock market had sort of gone high enough.
Yeah.
And I was doing that thing that you should absolutely never do, which is time the market, but I can't resist. I don't do it with property because it's all too illiquid and slow to sell stuff, and I don't sell them really. But with stocks, I fall into that trap quite a lot, and so I was having a look at those, and I often procrastinate with those because I don't have the same level of knowledge. With property, it's usually pretty simple. I can be quite methodical and say, what's the yield? Is it above this? Is it below that? What's the debt on it? You know, what does the rent look like? And then it's quite quick to make a decision. So in the early days of property, I did procrastinate because I had less knowledge. Therefore, I didn't necessarily know what to do. But I found going out there, doing it more and more and more, it became, I could look at a deal and go, well, that's no good, and just no.
Yeah.
Or, very quickly I go, do you know what, that is so cheap compared to everything else. Well, that's brilliant for whatever reason, and just dive in. And you just, when you've done something over and over again, you've turned it into a cookie cutter, you just know whether it's good or not, and procrastination tends to go away.
Yeah, so it sounds like a few things: deep knowledge, and then repetition, and then perfection along the way. So obviously you've become, but by a lot of people's standards, very successful. And you sort of do notice with some people, especially on social media, they're sort of very clear that they are sort of very happy with their success. You're quite well known for being extremely sort of, down to earth and sort of grounded. What is it that's kept you down to earth?
Well, I mean, I think it's probably quite important to, have a section of your sort of friendship group and, people that you network with several levels above you. So, I'll sort of have a few property investors who are friends who have got portfolios, in the hundreds of millions. And I know a couple of billionaires. And, when you sort of spend time with people like that, you suddenly realise that you're pretty small. And I think the same goes for them. If barring Donald Trump, perhaps. But a lot of them, if they...
I wonder how long this video would go before we mention the Donald.
A lot of those guys, I think they'd always realise there's guys much bigger than them, and I don't know, it's probably just not who I am, it's not who my dad was, it's not who taught me up, brought me up to be, and I sometimes have a bit of a chuckle at, I don't know, it's just not really.
Are there any things that you do, sort of day-to-day tasks or activities that people watching this might not expect a multi-millionaire property investor to do that might interest them? Yeah, so
I do some things I probably still shouldn't do, but I just, I can't stop doing it. So, every 2 or 3 months I go around the HMOs and I have a look. Probably because I don't know. I want to make sure that there isn't a load of mess around or rubbish, because these are quite sort of big buildings. So I want to see what the management's like. So that's a sort of valid reason to go around. And there's no one probably who is quite as bothered as me at making sure it's good. Sort of started getting involved in the heating a little bit. One of those sort of things. So I've installed we've been running a few tests, and I've installed Nest heating system at home, and I've put one into a sort of block of cluster flats. It's about 40 rooms we've got in there, and over Christmas I started having a play with it, and it's quite good because you can sort of pin code them all, and you set the temperature.
Yeah.
No issue with sort of people having the temperature at sort of 2021, but often what happens is they turn the heating onto full, and then they regulate the temperature by opening the window.
Yes.
Yeah. And they just leave it on. Yeah. So I quite enjoyed it. I mean, you sort of get it on your laptop. You get all the flats up, and you can sort of play God. Do you know what I mean? That room there. We've just had a message through. There's they've just had a newborn baby. Right. Well, make sure that's nice and warm. That guy's 6 weeks late. We might take a couple of degrees off that one. Do you know what I mean? No, that's a joke. But I have been sort of getting a bit more into that. I quite enjoy sort of going around, Yeah, just doing a drive around the local town and looking at what's for sale and what's being developed. I know that that's something maybe any good developer would do, but I think it tends to push you on. I go around turning lights off all the time, making sure everything's on PIR so it comes on and off. I do feel a bit like a caretaker sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where you sort of, it matters to you, and if you sort of thought for years that this light is going to be on for years and no one's ever going to spot it,
that would piss me right off. Yeah, it is. It's shit, that thing's going to be on there for.
It's just the wastefulness of it, I guess.
Yeah.
It's not kind of that you can't afford the electricity.
No.
It's just the wastefulness and unnecessary aspect of it.
Yeah.
Okay. If I can move on to some stuff from a while ago. So I remember reading. It's been probably about a year since I read it, but in your book, Low Cost High Life.
Yeah.
You talked about how you'd kind of bought or you were going to buy a sports car at a I remember it being a particularly young age.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what it was. Maybe it was between 18 and 21 or that sort of bracket. And it was very hard to get insured on high performance sports cars at that age. Yeah. And kind of there's a story about how you kind of wouldn't stop calling insurance companies. Yeah. Is that something that, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I just get up. I'm quite AD, audio digital. So I'd just sort of sit there and I'd be trying to buy a really fast car. None of my friends could buy a fast car, and I'd go around all the different insurance companies, and they'd all be quoting £2,500 and I was like 19 years old, and bearing in mind this is 20 years ago, that was a hell of a lot of money. So it was no way any of us were going to buy a car like that. But I found if you rang 20 of them, eventually one of them would do it. And they might, say the excess is some massive amount and this is that and whatever. So that sort of taught me in some ways that if you're willing to really persevere at something and do what other people won't, then you can make it work. And you can imagine I'd be driving around in this thing and everybody like, how the hell's Mark Comer doing that? Because even the rich kids couldn't get one.
Because it wasn't a matter of the money, it was the insurance.
It was the insurance. So a lot of them, the insurance companies would just say no. And even the rich kids, the dads wouldn't pay £2,500 for car insurance. So that was great. And obviously that all the way through, with property, that's really helped. So through the credit crunch, it became very difficult to borrow money, especially for us because we had sizable portfolios, and the big buy-to-let lenders, they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't lend to us. So I just ended up pounding the streets of London, going and seeing loads of different banks. I got the BBA, which is the British Bankers Association list of all the banks, and just started going around them. And started sort of building relationships directly with banks. And a lot of them would be like, what the hell are you doing here? Or I went to see an Israeli bank, I went to see a couple of Arab banks, and I went to see one called Adam Bank, which is owned by RBS, and actually a couple of them were like, what's this Peterborough place? Oh, we might come and have a look. And you seem alright, it's all about yields, is it? And
they booked you in, but they had to look up on the map where Peterborough was first.
Yeah, a lot of them just told me to go away, but in the end we got more and more lending that way, and whilst everybody else was saying, we can't buy, and what that enabled us to do was go and buy a load of property cheap, whilst most of the other investors and developers were saying, there's no finance. But there was finance. If you went hard enough and looked at enough places and rang enough people, often properties like that, when one thing's really good, the other's a bit more difficult. Well, the deals, the prices were amazing, the yields were amazing because the finance wasn't free flowing. Well, dig a bit deeper with the finance, fix that, and you've suddenly got an amazing position where you can buy everything that's going to be damn cheap, that 5 years later is going to look great, as it did.
I mean, both of those examples are sort of a real sort of story of perseverance, and there are lots of people who probably start off with the first kind of 2 or 3 banks or the first 2 or 3 insurers, and they're quite happy and they're quite sort of enthusiastic, and after the sort of first few no's or rejections or kind of knockbacks, they'll just give up because it's been too hard or it's taken too long.
They've just got to have a bit of faith that it's going to work, and somebody to sort of tell them that actually if you go hard enough at that, eventually you'll get 1 or 2. I suppose in some ways a bit like a salesman ringing 20 customers up and getting one to say yes. That's probably never really been my forte. I'm more of a buyer, more of a sort of an investor, but I think you've got to do it. I mean, planning, is so, it shouldn't be, but it's so down to which officer you get.
Yeah.
And every development I do, because I know it's not even I mean, I have a good idea what our council's going to do, but when I'm going into a new development, I can almost tell the kind of ride I'm going to get by the name of the officer that I get allocated. If it doesn't work with the first one, you just got to damn persevere, because you get to the end of the process, maybe they say no, then you maybe put another application in, or you appeal. It can take a while. I've always got there in the end, but planning can be a real game of perseverance as well.
Yeah.
Huge benefits at the end, but they must have these sort of blockers to almost stop the people who aren't going to persevere. You know, they're sort of like that, and then eventually you wear them down and you get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. The other one's patience, I guess. It's not one of my virtues, Mark. I'm very impatient, but I think I read somewhere that you'd said sometimes the hardest thing is to do nothing. And I guess it's where you haven't found a property deal for a while, or the type you're looking for, and you see one and it sort of fits, but not quite. And it'd be really easy to get this and then say, well, I've got a deal now, rather than to say I've got nothing on the go at the moment. But I've heard you say that before. Yeah.
So it's very easy to be a busy fool. What I mean by that is, you could, if you haven't had a deal for a while, you could look at deals or look at properties and kind of realise they're marginal, but you're sort of bored. And actually, what's going to happen is you're going to spend a load of time investing in it, a load of time doing things to the property, probably taking some risk in the process, and actually not make that much money at the end. So should you have done it in the first place? Shouldn't you have used your time more effectively somewhere else? And I think you are taking some risk as well, some unnecessary risk if there isn't a good enough return there. We had that during the credit crunch. We had a period from sort of probably towards the end of 2007, beginning of 08, certainly towards the middle of 08, it became very clear after the banks had pulled their loan to values down and started to, you know, tighten up, and, you know, Northern Rock had gone bust and Lehman had gone and all the rest of it. You know, the market was in reverse and it was going down. Now, stock market goes down a lot quicker when there's a crash. It can happen, you know, in a matter of days or weeks. Property is slower to adjust, and it's almost a slow motion crash. It could have taken a year for values to drop to where they needed to be, and then you've got a period where sellers or vendors are unrealistic. So property values around here through the recession dropped 30%. But you've still, you know, let's say the house was worth 100 beforehand, it was worth 70, probably by about March 09. But you're still going towards the end of 09 and into 2010, where vendors are going, my house is worth 90 grand.
Because of the lag.
Because of the lag. And the illiquidity of property takes a long time to transact.
Yes.
And because they're not all the same, like with a share you can say it is worth that much because it's traded on an exchange and it's very liquid, and they're all the same. With the property, they're all different, and they're subject to this sort of grey area in terms of valuation, and it therefore takes longer to work out what the things actually were for some transactions to go through. So we had that period where they were falling, and there were still lots of people sort of diving in. And the best thing to do was nothing. Just take a year off, and I'll know that next time. Or maybe I'll stay around. But I did buy a couple, and they looked very bad within a few months, and I soon got the message. And the same with the stock market as well. You know, would I pile into a load of shares now? Probably not. You know, it's fully valued, isn't it? Clearly. And it might be better just to sit it out for a little while. But then again, timing in the stock market, I mean, you know, very, very difficult to do, and impossible for someone like me. So
I mean, I think in Uncommon Sense you talked a bit about sort of phasing and things like that, but perhaps we'll save that for another time. Mark, I'd like to move on to commercial conversions. I feel like we should. There's probably lots of people watching this video who know exactly what we're talking about when we use that, but it's a sort of very specific term, and in case there's anybody watching this video who doesn't sort of follow exactly what we mean, what do we mean when we mean a commercial conversion?
So a commercial conversion is taking an existing commercial building which has a commercial use, so it could be a shop or an office or maybe an industrial building, which is, you know, a warehouse, and converting that building into apartments or maybe into rooms or cluster flats. So you're converting it from a commercial use to a residential use. And commercial values are much lower generally than residential values, certainly in this area and in a lot of London as well.
Yeah.
So the office we're sitting in at the moment, per square foot of space, is worth about £130 per square foot of space. An apartment in this area for the same square foot of space is worth about £250.
Right.
So it's about double the value around here between the two. Now, if this office was an older office and it had sort of, I don't know, the cabling and the wiring and the lighting and all that was older, and it needed a refurb and it wasn't in such a good area, the value would be even lower. It might be £70 a foot, £80 a foot. So buildings like that are 70 or 80, if you can take them to being worth 250, obviously there's a cost in between, and take some money out, there can be a deal there.
Yeah, okay, that's great. So generally kind of there are two ways that people seem to be doing their commercial conversions.
Yeah.
The first one is where they go through a full planning application,
Yes.
the long route as we sometimes call it, and there's also the method of using the permitted development regime to be able to sort of shortcut or take advantage of permitted development rules.
Yeah.
You've done both types, haven't you?
Yeah.
And I think you got into permitted development quite early as well.
Yeah.
Could you just give us a couple of examples of the sorts of deals you've done?
So in the early days, I think my first commercial conversion was permitted development, and that was what got me into it. And do you know what? I bought my first one at £30 a foot.
Really?
Yeah, it was so cheap because I got it agreed. Let's say it was 2011, 2012, and I think maybe we completed in 13. Maybe I've got my dates wrong. It was, let's call it 2013, something like that. The values were still very low. People didn't get it. Permitted development rights came in 13, we were able to buy them very cheap. I just kept my mouth shut when I was talking to the agents because obviously they didn't know what was going on. And then the planning consultant, would come in and help me out. And we didn't need planning permission, but of course on the first one it was a bit grey. But it soon came back and I realised this is all right. So we got that one away, and then managed to get a couple more sort of offices and convert them. But as time went on, I just found the office values were going higher and higher, and around here now they've got to, well, one sold last week at £108 a foot. Now that is beyond what I think is sensible, and beyond a level at which I think you can make money.
I'm from London, so I'm trying to just now. So
Yeah.
that's actually for London would be, but for Peterborough
It's
crept right up compared to other commercial buildings.
Yeah. I mean, all right, as an office, maybe it is worth that to somebody else, and of course therein lies the challenge, because maybe now this wasn't the case in the credit crunch, but maybe now you're not only competing with other developers looking to convert them, you're competing with some other companies or maybe public sector who are looking to buy that or to let that as an office. And as an office, maybe it is worth £100 a foot.
I found exactly the same problem in East London. I found the issue with warehouses, so I've been looking at maybe converting sort of warehouses, and that's light industrial, but actually there's a huge demand for that kind of unit.
Yeah.
So you're competing with people looking to use it for the existing use as well as
to convert it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always necessarily work. So around here, that one's gone at 108. It was sort of based on a comparable of one that sold at £100 a foot, which was a couple of years ago. I've heard them, at first I thought, my God, maybe they know something I don't, what have I done, maybe they can put more on the roof, whatever, this one that sold a couple of years ago. But I always watch afterwards, because I always like
to know what happens.
Yeah, you've got to.
And they put the block next door, you're like,
because it's one of two things. Either they knew a load of stuff you didn't, so you've got to learn what they did. So I always download all the planning applications afterwards and look at when the council said no for the stuff on the roof and why and all the rest of it, or they fuck up, and you can sort of sit there and go, well, I'm glad that wasn't me, and that's a reminder not to overpay. It was number 2 in this case. They applied to put stuff on the roof and whatever and found it difficult. And of course I speak to the local agents who sell this stuff, and because they're selling stuff for me.
Yeah.
Of course I've sort of kept my ear to the ground on that, and all I hear is that the developer keeps ringing the agent up, beating them up, telling them they've got to achieve this level just to break even, and the agent keeps saying to them, well, it ain't going to happen, you know, on the apartment sales. So you've got to be very careful not to do that. So it got to that stage, you know, I don't want to be a busy fool, and I don't want to take a load of risk, and I don't want to lose money. So so I started buying more and more stuff that required planning permission. I was doing pubs, and I still do pubs. Bought a series of those, converted them. We're doing some squash courts at the moment. We're doing a private members club. Often though, when they're that model, I'm converting them into cluster flats. So they're sort of very high end, nice rooms that go into a big flat. You know, they're all ensuited. They're really high spec. And I just find, you know, you need to apply for planning. You can usually get planning on those in this area. It depends where you go, and if you're going nationally, they've all got different, you know, different rules and regulations. But yeah, done a whole series of those, and then managed to get hold of the old Marks and Spencer's building in Peterborough. Bought that earlier on last year, and it's about 80,000 square foot, so it's a big building. A supermarket went in on the ground floor. The whole building, I'll talk about it more when I come to your event, Ozan. But the whole building sort of, it cost over 4 million, and we pretty much got all of that back now from the sale of the supermarket on the ground floor and a bit that we've managed to let to a housing association.
I mean, that's really exciting right there. I mean, I don't want to kind of spoil anything going into it now too much, but it's kind of, it's almost like having your cake and eating it, because you end up with a lot of the property, a big chunk of it, most of it, just for the transactional costs.
Exactly.
It's quite exciting.
Yeah. It has been in that one. I mean, on the others,
they're not all like
no,
that.
they haven't. On others, I've had to actually, you know, pay for the square footage, and but yeah, I mean, it's worked, and it completed at the end of last year. The supermarket on the ground floor, which is really, I'm sort of over the moon with it at the moment. But yeah, well, with buildings like that, I'm sort of doing things that other developers don't necessarily want to do. Lots of them don't want to apply for planning. You know, lots of them are further away. These London guys who are buying these offices, they don't know the local council or how the rules work, and you know, they'll be looking at planning through a sort of a lens based on their local area, and it could be a lot tougher to do that there. So there's a lot more risk for them to do things like that, and a lot of them, they're just focused on apartments. They don't want to be buying stuff which they're going to keep, and that's my mentality. I want to be holding stuff that's high yielding, for which there didn't used to be a market, but actually there is now. There's more investors buying blocks of cluster flats.
It's interesting.
It is. I used to think it was a limited market, but it isn't. You can sell them for good money now.
We've sort of touched on already to my next question, which is people who are doing commercial conversions seem to be in one of two categories. Either they sort of pick a niche, for example, used class B1A offices, and they move their territory, start close to where they work or live, and they kind of expand that territory based on whether they can get that supply of that particular type of building or not.
Yeah.
Then there's the other category, which you fall into, which is you've picked a geographic area and you just do what works or what is available in that area.
Yeah.
I think I've got that right.
Yeah.
There's no kind of right or wrong way of doing it,
No.
but, and both can work if you know what you're doing. But why have you decided to do it that way, to stay in your own area and do?
I'll tell you what it is. So I think if I could define those two sets of people, I think one is more of a traditional developer. They're converting and they're selling, and a lot of the time, I mean, it is of course better to have it locally because you can get on site a lot quicker and deal with things and all the rest of it. But I think the second type is more of an investor that holds.
Right.
Now, when an investor holds, they need to manage those units afterwards. So we have a letting agency, and the letting agency needs to be able to rent those units out and you know, manage the tenants. Now, yeah, we have got units half an hour, 40 minutes away, and I probably could do this model out there, but I just don't know the market as well. You know, to do big buildings there, and the management becomes more difficult. So I just find, if something's within sort of 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, well, it could be half an hour, 40 minutes if you have to, go further, not an issue. But for me, I can look a lot more, I spot a lot more, I know a lot more, I know how to get the planning done, everything like that. And a lot of it's about who you are as well.
Yeah.
I saw some, it's about your personal experiences. I saw some guys, in the old days, one guy in particular, I'll never forget him. Rob and I still talk about him, and actually Rob reminds me of this as well, because I was looking at some stuff around London, and I'd get back and it was a few million quid, and I'd get back and Rob would look at me and just go, remember that guy? Remember, what you've always told me about sort of staying in a kind of geographic area, and he's sort of usually been, right. This guy, what he did, and it's an extreme example, he went and bought so many houses, no money down, because you could do it back then. You'd get Mortgage Express along, and you'd sort of, you get a bridge, cash. You purchase it cash, and then in the afternoon you'd remortgage it, pay the bridge back with Mortgage Express, and you didn't put a deposit in.
Yeah.
And he set a squeege page up online to buy people's houses off them, rent them back, and buy them all no money down. And he bought 80 of them, but he scattered them everywhere, because you can imagine online leads come from everywhere. And he was not just buying them no money down, but he was completing and getting cash back. So he was getting 10 grand, 15 grand back on the day of completion, on top of, the lending was 10 or 15 grand more than what he'd spent on it, because he got it valued up, and they lent 85%, and he was doing loads of them. And he was a techie. He was very good at that bit. But he was managing these properties out of his rucksack. Okay?
Right.
Yeah. And what he wasn't good at was getting people to pay rent, which is actually a fundamentally important, if not one of the most important, if not the most important part of being a landlord. You've got to have well-managed units, especially with residential. The tenants have got to be paying their rent. You've got to look after the gas safety checks. You've got to make sure the electrics are safe and the maintenance is done. And to do that, you need people on the ground and a good letting agency, or keep it local. And he just didn't do that. And of course, he ended up going bust because he didn't collect the rent. He was living on the cashbacks. So I remember him. I seen a few other people, create a fireball by doing the scattergun thing. Yeah. Really put me off. I've got a couple of mates who really do know what they're doing, and they have sites miles away and sort of have to go there for 2 days of the week and all the rest of it. And just doesn't look very efficient use of time to me. And they always come out and go, yeah, it's all very well, but all that shit I'm doing up there, I'm having to pay. I haven't got as many builders, so the builder I'm using, he's costing me a lot more, and he's fucking me around. And then the letting agent I'm using, well, I've had to go through 2 new ones to find a good one, and that took me 3 years, so I lost a load of money out on that. And
it's like you're reinventing the wheel every time you go to a new area.
Yeah.
I think you might have answered the question on that one as to why you're in your area. But of course, people do very successfully. People we know all over the country are doing it, but they're focused in a different way. Yeah. They're focused on the niche, on offices. A lot of them
sell.
And they're looking to sell.
Yeah. So they're not having to manage them afterwards. All they need to do is get a couple of estate agents to sell their stock. I bet they would buy to sell in a very tight area if they could get all the stock, but they probably can't do.
What I thought was really interesting just now is when you mentioned that Rob sort of reminded you about the classic sort of developer goes pop or whatever story. I almost imagine that it's the other way around.
Do you know
maybe it was in the early days.
Yeah, it has been for quite a few years, but Rob and I, Rob's changed a lot, we both have, but in some ways Rob plays dad a bit more now. Like when I went and sort of bought this really big building, we had to put a few quid in, and
a few quid,
and of course I went around raiding certain pots, and Rob sort of, hey, you happy with all this? Are you? Yeah, we're just going to take the money out of it. I'm like, yeah, it's fine. And of course, he was fine and he was supportive, but he sort of reminded me of a few things, and.
Mark, can I ask you a bit about networking? So, what's networking done for you in your property career?
Well, networking has been huge for me. Over the years, I've met some of the best people that have helped me the most in property through networking. Some of the bigger investors which have already been down a path that I want to go. You know, if I can give them something and you know, we form a relationship, over a period of time I tend to learn a lot, tend to pick a lot up off them. You know, the right people.
Yeah.
Because of course there are all sorts of people when you go networking, and it's important that you align with people with similar values and also people who are doing what you want to be doing. So I've certainly learned a hell of a lot, and that's what I, you know, learning and sort of education and understanding new strategies and understanding better ways to run my strategies, property strategies. You know, that's what I sort of hold dearest. In addition to that, I've met people when I've been networking who have gone into deals with me, might have supplied funds, might have helped me, you know, find the money. So they're the two main things that I've probably got out of networking. Obviously, we have a lot of local property networking events. You've got your own one. So Progressive Property Networks right across the country. There's, I think it's 35 of them, something like that, running. So I tend to go across all the different sort of franchises across the country and meet a lot of people. That's where I do most of my networking now.
Right, so you still do that today, and that's...
Yeah, I go and network in those frequently. I go and speak in those.
I've seen you speak. I just didn't realise you were also networking. I know it might seem a bit naive, but I just sort of assumed that your networking was done elsewhere. But of course, why can't it be done?
Why can't it be? Yeah.
I mean, there are people there to see you, but also there are people with sort of complementary...
Do you know what? I learn loads of things from people who you know, have come to watch me speak, because I know quite a lot about that little area there, and property is several multitudes bigger than that sort of area, isn't it? So you know, I know all about that, but maybe they know all about that little thing, and I want to know something about that. So there's a lot of value in that. You know, maybe they're agents, maybe they can, you know, help me sell a unit. I know one of the ladies who runs one of the PPN networks. She was a commercial surveyor, and she was looking at getting me a tenant. There was another one that was sort of getting a council interested in purchasing a commercial unit off me. So there's all sorts of value you can get from networking and being at events like yours, Ozan. It's very valuable.
It's weird how sometimes you can just pick up one little tidbit that ends up being... I mean, you got a couple of sort of really sort of great examples of... And I've been at... I think I was at a talk that you did a while ago, and you mentioned... There's been two separate occasions. Once when you mentioned vacant buildings credit, which I didn't know about at all.
Yeah, which I got from networking.
Yeah, which you got from networking.
And to be fair, that came from Glenn Dell.
Yes.
Who?
Well done, Glenn.
Yeah, well done, Glenn. And his planning consultant, and that was through networking. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one. And what's the other one? I think it was land remediation relief. Oh. I didn't know about that either.
Do you know what? That came through a guy, my capital allowances consultant, and he came from a local property investor in Peterborough who buys HMOs, and I met him because I had a HMO running with a bad local manager probably about 10 years ago, and it was he turned it into sort of a den of iniquity. You know, there were women, there were blokes turning up at all times of the day and night, and you know, the drugs, the whole lot. When we eventually cleared it out, we took 300 needles out. And he actually had the house next door, and he sort of rang me up one day and he goes, Mark, it doesn't matter what the agent's telling you, I'm telling you I've got a load of these buildings and this is what is happening in your house. Go and have a look. They're full of shit, you know. So I went and had a look, and he was right, and he sort of, you know, put me straight on a few things, gave me a good agent to look after it better, and you know, I helped him out with a few things. And he put me onto this capital allowances consultant, and you know, we've saved huge amounts in tax over the years because of this guy, and he got me on the land remediation relief, and that was just networking. Yeah.
It's amazing what you can pick up.
It is.
We've kind of already mentioned it in passing, but to be absolutely clear, you're very protective of your time, and although you say you network and you go and do talks, I think you're sort of primarily sort of property focused, and you but although you're very clearly very generous with your knowledge, and you clearly enjoy discussing these things, I can tell from this interview, but obviously your availability, your time is, your diary is under a lot of pressure. So you've accepted our invitation to come to PPN Canary Wharf on the 10th of January to do your the commercial switch talk.
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you very much publicly. Thank you for agreeing to do that. What can people expect to learn or to hear about when they come and see you talk on?
Well, I'm gonna talk specifically about my latest deal, which is it's a big building. We're hoping to get somewhere around 80-90 flats upstairs. It was a supermarket. It was Marks and Spencer's, so I don't know, department store.
Yes.
Now has a supermarket on the ground floor. There's a lot of challenges with it. It's a big sort of heavy building. We've got to take some of the roof off. There's been some financing challenges. A load of capital allowances we're going to claim on it. There's a whole load of different ways in which we're going to make money out of this building, and I'm going to share those with you.
And maybe it's not sort of some of the run-of-the-mill stuff that people might see at some other sort of events. They sort of.
Well, I hope not. I hope this is bigger.
This is a multi-million-pound building we're talking about.
Yeah, I think the GDV, the gross development value, the sort of finished value, the whole thing is about, let's say, 17, 18 million, in that ballpark.
And outside London, so it's
huge building. It's a big old London.
Yeah. And there's sort of lots of learnings within one project, really, that people can vicariously kind of.
Indeed, and for myself as well.
And for yourself as well. So we're all learning to an extent.
Yeah.
So I suppose, Mark, we'll sort of wrap up there. Thank you very much for your time. It's been great talking to you, and we'll see you on the 10th of January.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks very much.